Hello, can you see me and hear me? Okay, POI is in the chat. I'll try to take one from CO. Let's start by framing what viatical settlements look like. We're going to claim that the terms are very likely to be highly unfair and people will overwhelmingly opt into this. First of all, we cannot regulate this as a government on opt side. Number one, you have no capacity simply to scrutinize all of the complex terms and jargon that occurs within every legal documentation, which probably there will be millions of on their side, whereas on our side, you can just say the clean cut thing that will ban this, so that it takes much less money. Number two, regulation requires sustained political capital, which is just unlikely to occur on their side. Number one, because only relatively poor individuals have the necessity to take out these viatical settlements for large amounts of cash in the short run. So the political incentive to regulate this is low insofar as poor people don't possess tons of political power in terms of lobbying, etc. Number two, these viatical settlement firms often are in collaboration with things like pharmaceutical companies, or at least closely related to them, which means that they're able to tap into tons of capital that they can use to lobby, for instance, governments. Second of all, why are these terms likely to be bad? I have 5 structural reasons. The first reason is that these companies often possess asymmetric information in comparison to individual patients or individual families, because of the fact that these relatively poor families often have difficulty accessing things like high quality information and therefore are easily manipulated by these firms which know much more about the industry, which know much more about what each life is worth, whereas the individual family is very unlikely to get a good bargain simply because they have many difficulties to accessing specifically like how much what the fair price of this would be. Number two, people have irrational biases in favor of spending tons of money on things like families or relatives that are terminally ill. And the reason for this is that the society generally places a very high premium on helping your family, or a sense of obligation for not letting your family die, and ensuring that their life ensuring that you're not the one that like pulls the plug and makes them actually end their life. So this is a sense that is often very easily manipulated by people to create a sense of guilt. The fact that if you do not spend a lot of money on maintaining the survival of like one of your family members who is terminally ill, or if you do not put tons of money into a surgery that might have speculative outcomes on this patient's health, if you do not do these things, you already have a sense of guilt that, you're not providing for your family, that you're not a responsible individual, that you're not doing good. But these companies are able to utilize this to like engage in lots of advertising to say that if you do not do this, then you are a guilty person, to say that we're offering you a convenient mechanism to throw tons of money into this treatment. And therefore, if you are someone who has any sense of filial piety, for instance, you should definitely do this for your parents when they are terminally ill. This is a narrative that people are very difficult to push back against because it's the society that like indoctrinates this since their childhood and it's the world that they grew up in. Third reason is that often people have a strong sense of refusal to face death, and therefore they like come up with all sorts of mechanisms to try to prolong their existence or prolong the existence of their family members simply because they're unprepared to cope with their death and they fear that uncertainty to a very irrational extent. Number four, there's unlikely to be competition within this market for the reason that it's very difficult to like engage with individual circumstances, like people with like different conditions in different socioeconomic statuses often will face very different like terms and very different bargains, which is just something that's very difficult to identify, and therefore this market will be highly inefficient. The final reason here is that people often have a significant short-termist bias, especially when you need to do the surgery, for instance, in a month or in a week. You often need to get money immediately rather than have the time and energy to negotiate good terms. And often because you prioritize getting money now as fast as possible rather than the best amount of money you're going to get, the bargain you're going to get is probably a really, really bad one. The third thing we're going to suggest is that the people you are likely to impact are those on which this amount of money will probably do very little. The first reason is that if this is a reasonably affordable surgery, or if this is something that has like lots of like medical evidence for for instance, then you can probably just take out a loan. And like, because this is guaranteed to succeed, then, firms will be willing to take into account the fact that this person's life will just be prolonged for a relatively large number of years to a very high degree of certainty, and take that into account and be willing to assign you the loan. Number two, we say that on the comparative, life insurance policies are likely going to work because number one, lawyers have the incentive to help you get things like life insurance, because like if they succeed in doing so, they probably can take like some commission fee, take like some amount of the large amount of money. So they absolutely have the incentive to do this. Number two, if you provide life insurance for people, but you do not actually pay them in the majority of instances, then this probably hurts your reputation to a large extent. And because life insurance is like signed when people are in relatively similar conditions, for instance, when they're 20 or 30, that is a relatively competitive market. Third of all, family members can often try their best to ensure that you do get your insurance money back, because it's a large amount of money. People have large, like very, very strong incentives to fight for that money using whatever capital they have. So for all of these reasons, we say that people right now perhaps would have some fear that life insurance policies will not pay them out at the end of the day, especially given that these viatical settlement companies are likely to advertise or propagate this false image that it's difficult to acquire life insurance payouts at the end of the day, and irrationally push you towards like viatical settlements, which also like corresponds to the short-termist bias I previously referred to, but we tell you that in reality, it is probably likely that you are able to get life insurance on our side of the house. Given that two very simple arguments, which are just downstream all of this characterization, number one, families get more money and make better decisions. Number two, you decrease the amount of money spent on palliative care and medicine on our side. Before that, CO.
Yes, all of your analysis of irrationality of the terminally ill is fully symmetric for the very signing of a life insurance from the get-go. By your logic, would you also ban life insurance?
No, this is entirely different, right? Like all of these reasons just indicate that at this time of distress, when people are like incredibly are forced to deal with this decision, but they have like many social reasons and social norms that lead them to not want to face the consequence of the decision immediately, they would like do very irrational things. First of all, families just get more money, which is a good thing, because on the comparative, as we explained to you, you often spend huge tons of money on things like palliative care or experimental treatments or surgery, which is often irrational, which often is never ending. First of all, as we told you, these conversations often occur in an irrational manner, and therefore, on our side of the house, we enable individuals to access more autonomy. Second of all, on our side, when you probably sacrifice the last few years of certain a certain patient within your family, you are able to actually get life insurance at the end of the day for the rest of your family, which often does just utilitarian, in a utilitarian sense, have a bigger impact in terms of making more future money available for people within your family, making affording college education, for instance, more available, which just impacts a larger number of people over a bigger time frame. Furthermore, we say that this increases the amount of money spent on palliative care on their side of the house, because more people will just throw money at medicine, which then pushes up the cost of medicine for everyone, whereas on our side, that doesn't occur and medicine becomes more affordable. Very happy to propose.
All right, I thank the PM for that speech. I call upon LO. Here.
Can I be heard? Brilliant, thank you. Okay. Proposition don't acknowledge that opting into one of these agreements is very difficult, because there are many pressures which push you towards keeping your life insurance. We recognize that at a point at which you have to make this decision, the alternatives you would like it to be worse. We're going to explain why this is a good form of agreement, and also by the comparative, it does not stack up. Before that, though, questions of the counterprop. They say we can't counterprop. We say we can. 3 reasons. Firstly, fiat. Notice the reasons they've given for why these deals are likely to lead to profit-driven companies getting large amounts of money. They're backed by pharmaceutical companies with large lobbies, means that it's quite difficult to ban them. As a result, then, we have a large amount of political capital on our side of the house if we are going to be symmetric with them. Secondly, we have substantial interest in regulating these sorts of industries. The reason for this, or these sorts of agreements rather, because death is proximate to people to a substantially great degree and is something that people care about because everybody will face it at some point in their life, as per the framing that was given by opening government. As such, there has to be some sort of political prerequisite for there to be a ban in the first place. People who were angry on their side of the house, those sorts of people are still likely to give the political backing behind our counterprop on our side of the house. The third thing to say is just on capacity. We think there's a large amount of lawyers and people who litigate in this sort of field, specifically because it is a guaranteed return on investment, i.e. people are going to die, everybody will, so everybody that opts into this policy is going to get you some form of benefit in the long run. We also think that often these agreements that are on their side of the house are quite similar like for these companies and don't actually have loads of different technicalities and differences. The reason why is just cost efficiency, right? The conditions in which somebody dies are likely to be like relatively similar if they're going into these sorts of agreements for the reasons I'll frame in a second, which means that you're likely to have similar terms, meaning you're able to make broad blanket regulations, ones like this. Firstly, you provide people information about what these agreements look like at the point at which they're opting into them. So you give them like proper transparency with doctors and things like this when they're doing it. Secondly, you ensure minimum pricing so that people aren't just given no money or not given like a substantial amount of money, which actually is able to match up to what they should be getting. The third thing to say is that we ensure minimum wait times, which is that you don't immediately allow people to jump into these decisions without a consultation process where they're able to think through the decision, because we acknowledge that these actors might be irrational. This sort of counterprop is just very like common sense, and I think that it's fair in this debate. Our argument then is this allows people to get money when they really need it, and the comparative is worse. Notice, deciding to get rid of life insurance is difficult for three reasons. Firstly, marketing and social conditioning by companies and doctors, which is likely quite proximate to at the point at which you're going to die, is something which you internalize quite deeply, which means that you are reluctant to pull back. The second reason is family pressures, which is that people in your family will benefit from this life insurance policy into the future if it is going to pay out in the vast majority of instances, and as such, they remind you of this, and so it is hard to give up on them. The third reason is sunk cost. You put a large amount of time and money into the dream of allowing your family to live a better life after you die. We think that given this framing, it is unlikely that people opt into these agreements in the vast majority of cases. When they do so, it is because they have a very valid reason to do it for a couple like sorts of reasons. It's not so that you can like cure your illness because you're terminally ill, but it's like you need short-term finance in order to pay other debts, like you're going to foreclose on your house, right? Or because payment for painkillers are prohibitively expensive because the pharmaceutical oligopolistic monopolies that we see in the status quo, which mean you're not able to just pay to be able to cope with the day-to-day living. It means the avoidance of very high insurance premiums at the point where they've been hiked up to a massive degree because the amount of harm being caused to you is quite large, because the certainty that you're going to die means that insurance companies can gouge you and are going to be able to continue to like offer you bad rates, and you notice you can't continue to put up with these rates. In these sorts of terrible instances, we think that people are likely to opt out of their insurance policies. We think they're going to spend the money that they get well for two broad reasons. The first is they just have epistemic access into the things that make them feel better or worse. So if not doing physiotherapy one day or having a nicer like room in your house that you're able to build is going to allow you to be happier, then people are able to quantify that for themselves better than other people, and so they can make this decision even if you're very sick. The second reason for why you're going to make good decisions is the bureaucratic process which you must go through in order to make one of these decisions forces you to have conversations and to think through preemptively what you will spend the money on, because you need to justify to people around you why you're not keeping your policy. As such, you need to give them a clear and concrete actionable plan of what this money is going towards, because there's a high degree of scrutiny given the previous mechanisms I gave why it's hard to opt out of your policies. Therefore, you will buy things that will make your life better. The impacts are that, one, you save money for people on insurance that might be prohibitive, which would then hurt you down the line anyways. We think opting out of these policies particularly good, and it's easier to justify opting out of bad insurance policies at the point where you're going to get money out of it, but also you just increase somebody's quality of life. On weighing, the individual who is suffering and is going to die is the most important actor in this debate because of the proximity of the harm to them every single day when they wake up and go to sleep. We think that if you can make their lives better, then that is something which is quite beneficial. And we also think the certainty of this impact, given their epistemic authority, is particularly good. Before I explain why the comparative is worse, CG.
So I agree with your counterprop being legitimate. We can similarly regulate against doctors caring about this. This means the rationality class should be determined on the psychological tendencies.
That's very hard to quantify without you actually giving that. I think that's not in line with where your opening does at all. Right. On why the comparative is worse. We think that, as is flagged by opening government, you probably take out loans for when you're in these sorts of desperate situations. Why would you take out a loan? Like, actually, they kind of say it, but like just quickly, is that people who are chronically ill can't work, so you can't make this money yourself, and also finances of your family are likely limited because they have caregiving responsibilities for you and they have to give up a lot of money for you. So this means the money doesn't grow on trees, so you take out loans. Why is this bad? Your family have to pay back the cost of these loans after you die, as opposed to this policy where you get money, which you will spend some probably trickling down to your family and some holding up to you, which is going to allow you to have a better sort of life. This, at the very least, is not going to continue to drain people into the future. So if there is a financial loss on either side of the house to the family, the difference is this. Every time they have to take away money to give to pay for your parents' death or something like this is a drain on the memory of that person. It is a consistent harm for the person who's trying to grieve and is trying to move on. We think that it also makes the lives of people who are dying substantially worse, because you have to think about the fact that I am going to inflict an economic burden on my children and my grandchildren at the point where they need to take out this loan. We think that this is different characteristically to I am taking out money which I have to take out to try to save them and which I'll be able to use in the short run. We've already explained why we think that this is a cost-efficient decision on our side of the house. As such, it is one which is good for future generations. The comparative for us, it just doesn't hurt as much financially. As a result, then, and we also think there's a lot of money you're likely to take out because of the filial piety, which is mentioned by opening government. That's why the loans are very big. For all of these reasons, we're very proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you, LO. I call upon DPM. Here.
Hi, am I clearly audible? One second. Sorry. Yeah, am I clearly audible?
Yep, you are.
Okay. You've already taken out loans, you've already sold your jewelry and your house and everything else you can afford, because your life insurance is the last thing you're willing to give away. The way life insurance works is once this person is gone, we have nothing left except this one pot of money that will keep us alive. The only point at which you would risk that highly important safety net is if you've already gotten rid of everything else, especially since people know they're going to lose money on the life insurance when they go for these situations at all. The implication of this is, first, this completely flips a lot of what opening opposition says. If you already have loans, you already could not solve the situation your partner was in or your friend was in or your parents were in or whatever. At that point, you've lost so much money that to pay back those loans, you need some kind of money that stops those loan sharks from coming after you, which means, first, it means that a lot of ops impacts on the family are long-term and also certain by their own analysis. The reason that OG gave you is that people want to save their families' lives. This is obviously true still. Second thing I want to point out is just that this still stands, right? OO's mitigation doesn't actually address the mechs. There's no interaction between what we say and what they say. They're random checks and balances. Why do they not work? The first thing OO says is that we'll put in transparency about the deal that you're getting, but that's irrelevant if you're completely irrational in that decision. If you emotionally want to spend that money on saving your family, then they say you'll get to talk to bureaucratic people, but isn't a good reason for wanting the money that I want a surgery or I want more medicine or I want more chemotherapy. This is obviously legitimate. Third, if they want to run any moral claim about the right that these people have to making those decisions, then presumably you can only have some level of restriction about what they do with the money. The vast majority of it would probably go to treatment for the reasons PM identifies. The fourth thing they say is family pressures. This also makes no sense. Can you imagine someone from your family telling you, please let your father die instead of spending money on his treatment so that we can get money after he dies and then use that for our benefit? First of all, this is psychologically difficult because no one wants to accept the idea that their family can die. They don't want to think about it. They want to avoid it. It's the most simple and easy response when they're in a terminal situation. Even if they've accepted it, they don't want to talk about how they are willing to bet on the idea that this person's life is less important than future lives of anyone else. Because right now, because of the proximity O identifies, that's what's absolutely primal in your head. That's the thing you're thinking about most efficiently. Third, they say the person themselves wants to make their family better, so they won't want to get rid of their life insurance policy. But the person's dying, right? They're often scared. They don't want to face pain every day. They want to get whatever treatment they can. So often they'll agree to this. And also, even if that's not the case, the person might even be a bad actor. This might be a family member who perhaps isn't the most rational and cares that much about their family, such as someone who is being selfish because they weren't particularly good fathers or good husbands or good mothers, because they were often put into these family situations through these circumstances they were in economically, especially in poor countries where families aren't always people who all love each other, but are put through through economic conditions, like say a woman needing a husband to provide for her, and then kids being formed because that's what the family wanted. Of course, they care about each other because of proximity. My claim is that they don't always act in extremely selfless ways. The most likely thing is to try to save your family member. And I think this is the most likely outcome also in the case where you would go for this policy, because otherwise, why would you even go for it in any context, right? Like, the decision would never be something you would even consider taking until you think that this matters right now more than the future of your family lives. Second of all, let's talk about two then clashes that result from this. First, where is the money better used and what kind of deals do you get? And second, what happens to the market as a whole? And I'll give justifications for like the moral claims here in the middle. First, oh yeah, one more response to regulation. Ricky's responses aren't dealt with. Like, poor people only care about this at the time of death, and they also care about other things like economic policies, and also they're often a minority in the political system. So it's difficult to even keep these regulations once fiat's them in. So they might obviously be taken down by companies who want to make more money. And lobbying is not just a word; it's how you run a campaign. You can't actually run for election unless you get money from big pharmaceutical companies who are often associated with these people. So they would only give you that money if you are willing to cut down these regulations. And since people only care about this at some points and only in some cases, and also don't think about them as much as other issues, often the regulations go away. Okay, that's the responses. Impacts. First, what happens when you get more family money on our side? We gave you reasons you would get that money through lawyers and in aligning their incentives with getting you a good payout. The first thing is that even though you get some palliative care on OP, that palliative care is very low in comparison, because especially if you're a poor family, all the analysis from OO says you can ratchet up prices. Every poor person just got like $1 million more at the time of death, because most of them would opt into this policy to save their family member. Hence, you can just raise the prices of these medicines, and no one can stop you from that because of the patent laws as well as the competition that OO identifies, which is that it's hard to set up a different company. Second of all, it also means that the price for everyone, the trials or the seats in this kind of chemotherapy clinic that you couldn't because they gave up their of research for how to solve these illnesses also reduces. Because guess what? Right now, because eventually there's a saturation in the market and people start to lose that money, you have to make it cheaper so that someone can afford your costs, someone can afford your medicines. That obviously goes away at the point where people are capable of putting that money in, which means that everyone is harmed by this. So even if you care about the people who are dying, we help more of them because we create an incentive to reduce the cost, and the incentive for this is already huge. There's investments for stopping terminal illnesses, etc., already in the system. The difference here is that you don't give them a sudden pile of money they can waste again. So I don't think the impact on the person matters that much. Finally, the utility for them is also low. They're already going to die almost certainly for the reasons Ricky gave you, because nothing else has worked. It's a terminal illness. It's often your brain degenerating, which can't come back. Often it's other illnesses like cancer, which constantly grow to the point where by the time you notice that they're terminal, they're so big that the only way to solve them is to cut off your actual skin cells and hence kill you in the process. So these are simply illnesses we haven't solved for decades because they're just structurally difficult to fix. So this person is probably still going to be in immense pain, isolated from a lot of their family members with doctors and feeling bad, guilt that they haven't helped their family and are causing a huge amount of financial strain on them, which will make them give up their life insurance policy and hence will agree to this and will have a bad life. Now, the family and why they matter more. Before that, CEO.
Aside from the fact that you are literally forcing these people to die younger because you don't want them to spend money on medicine because it would make medicine more expensive, your logic economically is flawed, because when prices rise, it is an incentive for more innovation and more creation of good medicine.
No, because you're making enough money that you don't need to reduce the cost because the price is inelastic. People are paying so much, you don't have an incentive to reduce the cost because you have enough profits already. That's the economic logic. Also, we are letting them die younger because the alternative is to let their kids and their families die younger. Weighing, first of all, the entire lives of these people are ruined because they're stuck in loans. So kids don't get school education, they don't get safety, they don't get employment because they can't get trading. They're stuck paying back loans. They're stuck like not having the money to even keep themselves safe. They get on the streets. This is what happens in poor places, especially in developing nations. This is incredibly large on scale, because the people these people often support are like large families that often have spent pretty much everything they had on supporting them, and they've lost that safety net. So often they also die faster because they get illnesses, they get actual lack of money and food and starvation. Second of all, the benefit is fucking huge, because if you affect like a few more people in the family who can get an education, who can get some kind of support and safety, their entire lives are better. Everyone is going to make someone die a little bit faster. On our side, we improve things by like 50 to 60 years because these kids don't get stuck in cycles of poverty immediately. Third of all, it's also the actual adults, right? If they lose their jobs, they need some time to grieve and to get therapy and to get over this. At the point where the member has passed away and they've accepted this, there's more money for them to actually get these services so they can continue doing what they need to provide for their family and support each other. The relationships get worse when you don't have the money to deal with this. You have the extra stress of having more and more debt put on you. On that, use the life insurance money for what it was meant for, which is life insurance.
All right, thank you, DPM. To close the top half, I call upon DLO here.
Cool, just checking I can be heard.
Yep.
Okay, I'll take the CGPOI. Verbally or in the chat is fine, but I will just prompt you guys. Firstly, 3 observations on Sharia's speech. The first is the framing Sharia does at the top also completely undercuts their ability to get any benefit. Because when Sharia says these are situations where you're already in debt, situations where you already take on massive loans, that is when you take on this amount of money. Those are also the cases where you cannot afford the prohibitively expensive insurance premium you'll be paying on opening government. The reason it's going to be prohibitively expensive is because this is a person who is certain to die and certain to die soon. Insurance premiums, so like the way insurance works is it's a safety net we all pay into, but the amount you pay is contingent on how likely it is that you're going to get paid back and when you're going to get it. This is why life insurance or insurance in general is much higher for elderly people than it is for younger people, because elderly people are far closer to death and they're more likely to cash back on the money that they've paid in. What this means, if you are terminally or chronically ill, you have that diagnosis, your life insurance premium is going to be higher, which means that if you are in the conditions the government says where you cannot afford to pay back your loans and your family needs this money and they're going to be left in a bad position, on either side, you're probably going to opt out of the life insurance because you can't continue to afford the premium. On our side, you get an amount of money which allows you to pay back some of those loans and also make your life more comfortable. In those situations, then, opening government is losing because those are cases where they still are in debt, but they still stop getting their life insurance and they still leave their children massively in debt. I think they just don't prove you can continue to pay for your insurance. I think they need to if they want to say that the insurance can be good for people, and it's bad if they don't. Second thing they say is that I think so basically is the claim that higher demand means the price of palliative care goes up. The first thing I would say is when they say it's an inelastic good, i.e. demand is inelastic as people pay any amount for it, I am unclear why the amount then goes up because there is more demand. Because if it is true that it's an inelastic good and people will pay any amount, obviously you would put the price really high on both sides because people will pay any amount for it anyway. But secondly, Hadar is correct. It makes it obvious that there is a market for this, creating an incentive for competitors to also start selling that palliative care product, but pitch it slightly lower in price than the existing price, which means that obviously over time, if there is more demand for palliative care, the price actually goes down because the fact that there is demand shows that there is a market, leads to more competition. Competition drives prices down because competitors are trying to steal clients from one another, essentially. Meaning palliative care actually gets lower price, which is a good thing for opposition. And the third thing is they say, just when Sharia says it's hard to keep the regulation panel, it's also hard to keep the ban for the same reasons. So like the likelihood the ban lasts into the future is the same likelihood the regulation lasts into the future, because the optics surrounding it and the political capital to get rid of it will be the same. So if they're trying to say regulation is likely to get overturned in the future, the ban is also likely to get overturned in the future. Obviously, both sides like their policy to last. I think we should just disregard that entirely. Firstly, then on regulation, I think Andy gives a huge amount of reasons as to why this is likely to be regulated and why it's likely to be regulated well. The responses we get from Sharia are essentially along the lines of like, but they never respond to our reasons in the Prime Minister's speech. I would note the reasons in the Prime Minister's speech were that there's asymmetric, that you don't have the time to scrutinize contracts, but I would note that you don't need to if as a government you regulate that they have to meet certain conditions, or simply don't assert that you don't have the time to go through these contracts. Secondly, I would note probably they would deter people from writing really bad, obviously illegal contracts insofar as that is now against the law and you don't want to get taken to court over it. They say it requires sustained political capital. We told you if fiat requires the same amount of political capital as their policy, in which case I think the regulation is equally likely to last. At that point, I think regulation is probably something that's good. But The reason we think this is probably something that is better than banning is because we think the bar for the government to ban something should be and is incredibly high. The first reason for this is just the harm principle in general, which is to say the amount of restriction imposed by the state should be proportional to the amount of benefit received for the harm prevented. All state decisions are inherently coercive in and of themselves for three reasons. Firstly, because every single aspect of your life is determined by state policy and legislation, because the education policy they write, the healthcare, welfare, wage, and labour policy the government provides, the curriculums they assign to you. Secondly, because the state has an overwhelming amount of coercive power to force you to do its bidding, even if you don't want to. They have a court system that can imprison you, military and police, who can use actual firepower and physical force, and there's no way for you to resist in the same manner. So there's very few mechanisms to oppose the authority on violence and monopoly on violence the state has. But thirdly, because it's impossible to move out of a state, you can only move between states, and even that is itself very costly. You have to leave people behind. You have to not all passports are equally strong. So this is a very difficult thing to do. At that point, what makes a law just is whether or not the outcome of that law's existence does more harm than good. We would posit that the ban in and of itself is too much of a restriction on agency. The regulation we talk about provides information and gives people more time to think about it, but ultimately we think they should be allowed to make irrational decisions if that's what they want. But secondly, why is it the banning things based on a harm or rational decision making also has a very high bar that we should think about very highly? The intuition here is we don't ban smoking, we don't ban drinking, we don't ban people like me from trying to hit on emotionally unavailable men, even though all of those things cause harm to us. And I would note, especially if opening government is saying the problem is that these people are irrational, I don't think that's enough to say we shouldn't allow them to make irrational decisions if they think it's best for them and they want to prioritize their immediate conditions. The reason for this is we trust and should trust people to make decisions that impact their lives, even if those decisions externally seem like a bad idea. The first reason for this is because everyone is a unique collection of experiences and memories and preferences, and the state does not have access to any of those things. You are in a far better position to decide what the best decision is for you, especially if you're in as much pain as opening government said. You are the one who gets to know if you want that pain to stop and you want to pay for painkillers, or if you don't. If you want to get the medication that's going to prolong your life by 5 years, or if you don't. You are in the best position to know that, and there is no objective external decision that the state gets to make for you on it. But secondly, you're just the most proximate to the consequences of the decisions you make, so you're the best suited to decide things. The state's very far removed from the decisions that individual people make, and I think the result of those two things is we should trust people to make their own decisions. Banning something like this is an incredibly high bar, an incredibly high restriction on people's agency that we think we should oppose. Before weighing the impact generally, closing.
This is a good principle against OG to just claim irrationality to the self. However, your monopoly of violence also applies to the families of these people. Given they're quantitatively more, why don't we prioritize them?
I'm going to go on to this. I think we should prioritize the individual person. Apart from also all of the cases where, as I said at the top of the speech, people are going to drop out of their insurance anyway, so they're not going to benefit their families. And on our side, they just get an amount of money. I think there's significant cases where the impact on families is the same in terms of leaving them in debt, but different in terms of if you get money right now. But there are other reasons. Firstly, I know this is just uniquely good access to money in ways that many others are worse. It is immediate. You trade off your likely very high insurance premium and get money for it immediately, but also you don't go to a loan shark or like a prohibitively expensive loan, which we think is bad and has more long-term benefits. Secondly, I think the benefit to the people in question is just significant and much greater than the people they're talking about. Maybe there's a life insurance policy that you spread against the 20 immediate family members that you might have. But I think we definitely and certainly get, the amount that goes to those people is very unclear. We definitely and certainly get comfort in your last days, or even just when you're chronically ill and you want to pay for treatments or protections that's going to make your life easier. We think it's a legitimate decision that makes your quality of life significantly better. But also you get peace of mind to the point where you don't have to still pay incredibly high insurance premiums, because I think that kind of thing weighs on your mind constantly. It's incredibly intense harm, and when you're always worried about finding the money to pay for the thing that is going to determine whether or not you can give life insurance to your family, I think it's a huge and awful harm to people while they're alive. But thirdly, I think the relative utility is just that certainly this person has their days are numbered, and we can make those days better, and therefore we should weigh that very highly, because we can have a huge impact relative to the number of days. For all of those reasons, proud to oppose.
All right. Thank you, DLO. I call upon MG to open the back half here.
Hi, am I clearly visible and audible?
Yep.
Okay, great. I will begin my speech in 3. 1 second, I want to be able to see the judge. Okay, I'm going to disconnect from audio here. Am I still clearly audible?
Yep, you are.
Okay, cool. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 cases in my speech. First, I'm going to give psychological mechs for your incapacity to make a free choice and waive them above the non-psychological mechs that we get from opening government. Then I'm going to talk about the harm to your families, why you choose this even if you left your families, how this harms your families, and weigh the importance of families above. Let's start with psychological mechs. I have 2 mechs here. First, you are coerced by fear of death. Second, you are irrational as a result of the availability bias of ending up without a good life insurance payout. Starting with the first mechanism. It's true that HUJI assert this mech. In PM, they say people are unprepared to cope with their death, so they try to prolong their existence. Let's actually explain why this is true. First, it's true because death is the utter unknown. You have absolute incapacity to know what happens there, and humans have a natural fear and healthy fear of the unknown. Second, the likely finality of it. Even if you believe in heaven, you have the doubt that it will just end. You have the fear that you will end up in hell. There is definitely a finality of everything that you know and your existence as you value it right now. Third, it's the absolute loss of everything you value, your contacts, your hobbies, your hedonistic pleasures. Fourth, it's the inability to fulfill your responsibilities, feeling that you're no longer an agent in this world, you're leaving people who you do care about, and you're no longer able to help. As a result of this, people fear death more than anything else in life. It is the strongest fear one can feel. I will weigh fear after my second mechs, why fear is so significant. My second mech is about the irrationality of the availability bias of ending up without a good life insurance payout. First, note, you irrationally believe that this is likely for you because you can't easily calculate odds. We think it's actually incredibly likely that you will get the settlement because as OO say, there's very consistent and well-known criteria. If you already got the insurance, then you will get the payout. If you're unlikely to get the payout, the third-party viatical knows exactly the same criteria that the insurance knows, and they won't give you this buyout. However, in contrast, you see in the media and in the news some such stories. It's sensational, dramatic, and scary to talk about people who no longer have access to the life insurance that they were reliant on. It's a good plot point. It's a good show, a good story to put on TV. People don't actually make decisions or don't feel informed about the world based on their analysis of actors' incentives and calculuses and what's actually likely for complex insurance lawyers. They do so based on the availability and severity of an outcome in their mind. And if they are exposed to it multiple times and it seems very severe, it's going to be very available for them. It's especially true along with a fear of death. So you fear that you are going to leave and be unable to give anything to the people that you left behind, and there's a finality to that as well. Let's weigh the internal emotions versus the guilt towards your family you get from OG. Note, this is important because we're determining between OG and OO whether guilt towards family matters more than your own selfish notions and internal mechanisms of how you work. I think people are primarily irrational actors who function based on emotions and fear. Emotions and fear are the most biologically ingrained, and they're the most easy to default to. This is especially true for people who are facing mental decline due to old age and terminal illness, or who are unable to think lucidly due to severe chronic pain. Why does fear of death override what OO say on you caring about your family? First, it is biologically ingrained. The strongest natural selection is for us to avoid and fear death. Secondly, it is socially catastrophized. We don't accept and welcome death in our society, as some tribal societies do. We talk about how horrible and terrible grief and loss is. This is doubly true in a modern atheistic society, which idolizes life and individualism and doesn't think about the communitarian aspects of what you leave behind, and doesn't believe heavily in a God and religion and that you'll be reunited with your family in heaven. Why does availability bias override you caring about your family? It is so prevalent and immediate in your thoughts that you're unable to rationally conceptualize that there are different interests. Even if you do care about your family, you're going to irrationally fear the likelihood of them ending up with nothing, and you'll try to at least have some inheritance to give them because you got a buyout from your life insurance. Let's move to my second argument on harm to families. But first, a POI. Opening. Closing.
Your decision to get a loan is also similarly influenced by these same biases. This psychological mechanisms are not comparative. It just falls into the top half clash about which mechanisms.
No, I don't think it's about accessing a loan. I think it's about giving up on your life insurance, which is the part that is irrational that we should not allow people to do. Let's talk about harm to families. Why you choose this, even if you love your families. Note the framing. At the worst case, we have more mechanisms than OG for irrationality, even if they're not better. But I do think they're better. I think they're deeper explained. But in the cases where irrationality happens, we explain now why this matters more than anything else, because we explain our impacts while OG assert them. Now, why do you choose this even if you love your families? I explained above all my irrationality analysis. Let's talk now about harm to families. I want to talk first about the practical harm, second, the principal harm, third, the sense that I'm not cared for and loved. On the practical harm, While people are alive, while the people who make this decision are still alive, it creates conflict. It's a massive, irreversible choice that has significant effect on your loved ones. It creates distrust and resentment. It is similar to you changing your will before you die. If you're unable to have discourse, you get silent resentment from them. This is going to lead to lifelong guilt and regret afterwards that they didn't better spend the last lives of while their family members were alive, making good memories and experiences with them. But once people die, we think that there is a significant importance of life insurance. Why? Because people who die are still supporting their families. They're still oftentimes productive members of society. They still might be getting an active pension that their families are utilizing. These life insurances are significant in allowing people to overcome the financial as well as emotional harms of this tragedy. Finally, families likely, let's talk secondly about principle on families. There is a contract that is being broken. There are two directions to explain this. First, there's an expectation among families that they're going to get this money. They make life plans based on it. They take a mortgage or student loans knowing that their father has a life insurance policy of $1 million and is terminally ill. They presume that they'll get this life insurance. These are irreversible choices that they can end up saddled with debt over for life. But secondly, we think that there is a sunk cost and a contract being broken where they presume they would get this in exchange for services and care rendered. Some kids, not all populations, but a large proponent, tens of millions of people in the United States, spend their time taking palliative care of their loved ones, not working, not studying, not even dating, putting their life on hold. Part of their calculus for this is this will be worth it because of the payout I get in the end. They deserve this payout. The final reason here is the sense that I'm not cared for and valued by my family member. At the time of death of a parent, I want to remember them as someone who loved me, who trusted me, who respected me. Now, what I feel is they didn't consult me. They gave me a long-term harm and deprioritized me, ignoring what I did for them, ignoring what I felt about it, not treating me as a responsible adult who gets to decide about this life insurance policy. It makes people question whether they were good children. Did I not deserve what I thought? Did I anger them? It's similar to being cut out of a will in terms of the emotional harms. It makes the grieving process much harder. You have unanswered and unanswerable questions. You have feelings of guilt, of resentment. You have guilt for that feeling of resentment, and you have no way to resolve this. You will have to carry this until you die. There are more people in your family. The families are have more years to live. They're going to be affected for longer. They're going to be affected to a greater extent. And for all of these reasons, go with closing government.
All right, thank you, MG. I call upon MO. Here.
Okay. Hi, guys. I assume I'm audible and visible. Perfect. And you're not frozen, so that means that's great. I am going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. To a large extent, life insurance is a predatory industry that significantly harms many people by selling them a pipe dream without ever following through, where many of them end up getting paid nothing, and they don't even get the benefit of an insurer who has a vested interest in keeping them alive. We have 3 paths to victory. 1, we're logically prior to basically everyone in the debate. If you don't get the money from the insurance, then none of the impacts that were discussed matter. Second, without access, the comparative is 0 money, and that means that when Gov are talking about, oh, at least we'll have something. No, you won't have something. At least on our side, you will get something. But thirdly, it also just shows larger impact on the more important populations. If we're lengthening and improving the quality of life of people who are suffering from these kinds of illnesses, if we prevent the poor people from spending large amounts of money on something they're never going to get the benefit of, that means that they get to save that money and use it on other things. Before I enter this one point of extraneous rebuttal, we hear from closing government, many people might lack rationality because they think they won't get the money after death. Okay, they're just not going to do life insurance. They're probably not within this debate in the first place. Great. Why do we think that people don't get life insurance payouts or the benefit of or the benefits that come with aligning the incentive of the insurers that you live longer? 1, life insurance is a predatory industry today for 2 reasons. 1, they want to sell life insurance in a predatory manner because they don't want to have to pay out the life insurance, but they sure as hell want to get the monthly payouts from it. They want to get a steady stream of repeatable income, which oftentimes comes with a sunk cost fallacy because you have given a lot of money to this insurer over time. And once you've done that, then it feels like, oh, I may as well carry on paying. And also, And this creates a steady stream of repeatable income with a high degree of certainty. Secondly, they can put a lot of limitations on the payout mechanisms, which caps their downside very significantly. They know how much they're going to end up paying, and they can make sure that the likelihood that they're ever going to end up losing on a single contract is very, very low, definitely on aggregate, which means that they want to constantly be pushing life insurance, especially to people who don't need it, who aren't going to ever be, who they're never going to actually pay out to, because that pads their bottom line. This is clear. Second, why do they succeed in selling this life insurance in a predatory manner? Two main reasons. One, there is a massive information imbalance, right? They have a lot more information about what is the likelihood that they're going to be able to pay because of the legalese that they use, which oftentimes people can't understand, because of the various legal limitations that they put on when you pay out and how you pay out and what kinds of things you pay out for and what the amounts are and a timeline for payout. But secondly, because oftentimes they can sell a narrative that people are very vulnerable to. And this is in two ways. One, they can sell a narrative of safety, of caring about your family. Doing this becomes not something that makes financial sense, but it makes a lot of emotional sense. I want to care for my family, and I want to be the kind of person who cares about my family and does things that are going to be good for them and ensures that they aren't left with nothing. But secondly, they also use all of the classic media tools like ads, like phone calls that push it on you and give you loads of information about how, oh yes, there's this one guy who got a big payout and then he could pay for the pension, or don't worry, then they won't be stuck with a house where they have to pay a mortgage, or all these kinds of things. And people in nice cars with nice pictures looking really happy on TV when they get the life insurance payout, which oftentimes people want to believe in and want to have that kind of hope, which makes them very, very vulnerable to this. Why do people not actually receive the payout? There are three reasons for this. One, the bureaucracy of it. Oftentimes it is very complicated and difficult to understand how to actually get the money. The person dies, and then you need to start filling out forms that prove death from a specific reason, that explain why you're a legal person who should receive the money from that payout. And this means two things. One, it just makes it very, very difficult if you come from a poor background, or you don't have a lot of free time, or you can't pay somebody else to do it. Like, it's just a massive amount of effort. It's hours and hours of your life for something that you may not even get the payout in the end, which means that many people just give up along the way. But secondly, oftentimes you get disqualified. You fill out the wrong form. You didn't understand what the doctor had written in the doctor's handwriting, and you can't access the doctor because you don't even know who he was, so you can't go to the hospital. So that means that you fill out something that isn't exact, and they say, oh no, you lied on the insurance form, so you lied when you were filling out why you deserve to get this money, so you don't deserve to get it anymore. Secondly is legalese. Oftentimes you just don't know what you're actually going to be able to receive, or when you're going to receive it, or what will disqualify you from receiving it. So for example, certain treatments might suddenly disqualify you because they run a risk of death, but you don't know that, and your doctor often doesn't know that, and that because doesn't know what insurance you have, which means that you take these treatments even if they're going to disqualify you from getting this. But fourthly is lack of recourse. Most people can't just pay a lawyer to run an endless case against an insurance company. Oftentimes, the time till you actually get the money means that if it takes 20 years, it's no longer relevant to you to a very large extent, and you moved on with your life. But also the power imbalance of the fact they have better lawyers, more knowledge, closer ties to political organizations, etc., makes it very difficult for you to ever access the money or even win when you do try to push it through, which means if you don't have recourse, you have to be scared of you ever getting the money. So this means to a very large extent, you never get it. Why do people understand and get their rights on our side? Before that, I'll take up POI from closing. Open it.
HUJI. Your mechanisms apply to viatical settlement companies as well, who can scam you with fake ads. But when lawyers want money, they want you to get your money back from insurance companies, so they align incentives, which leads to better rules and regulations.
Great. Like, this assumes that you have access to a lawyer. When was the last time, like, have any of you ever bought life insurance? They sell it to you on the phone. You don't go put it through a lawyer. What the fuck are you guys even talking about? Second, but also let's explain why we think that this leads to a much better scenario. Notice that at least on our side, they're getting some amount of money. So I've already won the debate on that kind of delta. But let's make that delta bigger. So one, I think that the companies who are buying the life insurance want to reach out to many people and buy more of the life insurance, because often, obviously, they earn the money at scale and on the margins through holding this life insurance over time. This means, one, that life insurance holders actually get money. But secondly, it also means if the value is very low of your life insurance, it makes it clear the life insurance policy isn't worthwhile. When you apply to the life insurance company, to the company who's going to buy it off you, and they say, oh, actually, that's worth $5, then you know that it's not a good life insurance. This provides a free market external mechanism for you to assess how good your life insurance is, and then you can stop paying it if it's not going to give you anything and if it's not worth anything. Thirdly, the company actually buying the life insurance is going to assist you to buy a better life insurance policy that is worth a lot more money and will pay out a larger amount in the future, which means that oftentimes you can get their help in canceling your existing life insurance, preventing you from paying things unnecessarily, and also end up getting more money from them than you otherwise would. Why does this matter? Even if you end up getting less money. A, the people who do get some amount of money can actually use this to give money to their kids who they wouldn't have, can pay for a better hospice, and can alleviate the burden on their family, which means instead of your daughter needing to stay at home to take care of you, can go out to work because you have a carer. But it also aligns the life insurance incentives with you. Now the insurer wants you to live as long as possible because there is a very real chance that you will have to pay out, which means it's worth their while to give you better care. They pay for newer drugs, they give you more doctor's visits, and they also give you better holistic care by giving you things like yoga and nudges and incentives to live healthily, because those are the things that lengthen your life. And now when you die, that costs them money. This is amazing because it lengthens people's lives and gives them better quality of life. And it also means we don't waste our money. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you, Emma, for that speech. I call upon GovWhip to end the case from Gov bench. Here.
Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me? No. Let's just move this. Do you want me? Should I just sit there?
No, let's just move this.
Okay.
You want my timer?
No, it's fine. Sorry, 1 second. You have a strange setup here. Okay. That was a lie. 3, 2, 1. Two things I will do in this speech. The first is to explain why I think that we do win the rationality clash. But more importantly, I'm just going to talk about why, even if we just have independent mechanisms from top half for why there is irrationality, the question here is to weigh between those cases. If each of the teams has some chance that people make an irrational decision or just make a decision to take this or to not take this, what are the harms that flow from this? Should we care more about the cases in which they're irrational or more in which they're irrational to one side or towards the other? Our impacting is the one that sways this, and I'll respond to OO's impacts on this and weigh that directly. Before that, quick responses to CO. I think CO has a problem that is governmental regulation in a few ways. The first way that this is a problem for them is that OO's counterprop is that the government gets involved directly. The reason why this is important is because it A, places an ability on government teams, yes, even in CG, since OO say a counterprop that's symmetric to what we can do, to also ask that the government regulates vice versa. But secondly, it also makes sense because if the government only regulates against the ability of these, because if the government only regulates in one direction, it seems biased and is then criticized by the media for wanting to only prioritize one of those actors, which is why it also has to regulate for good information, for accessible information, also provided in the case that it's these other, giving away settlements. I don't remember their name, the V settlements. Secondly, I also think that it's just likely that the hospitals inform you directly, because remember, hospitals in the overwhelming majority of the world are not private. They're owned by the government. Their incentives are directly supposed to not be tied to any private actor. And indeed, even if there's lobbying at top levels, the hospitals directly are subsidized by the state, not to mention the ethical standards the doctors swear into when they go into the job, taking a harder job in order to help people. For both of those reasons, doctors prioritize the benefit of the patient, have seen many cases in which this is applied, and probably have a person on staff to deal with such legalities, also in other matters that matter in terms of like legal decisions around this medicine, which means that there's ample advice and information, even if there isn't regulation on the side of the of the kind of things that are offered to you on their side. Lastly, I'm not going to go deeper into this because I want to go into my other clashes, but note that you have no comparative on why you aren't similarly irrationally tainted by the V settlements when they are offered. I want to talk now about rationality. The first thing I want to take out is the top half claims on external circumstances. When HUJI say lobbying and OO say doctors are lobbied. The reason that these things are symmetric is, as I pointed in the context of CO, it is likely that on our side, we're able to similarly implement, and even if we don't have a counterprop at this point, like responding to their counterprop at this point, we explain the likelihood that we're resistant to lobbying pressures in direct response to OO. But also HUJI's analysis on this external influences idea is a little fuzzy, right? They just give a few one-liners to explain why these lobbies control the state and are able to influence it completely in order to get people to make irrational decisions, which I don't think is likely, as OO point out. Lastly, I would also just note that this is incredibly context dependent. In some cases, maybe the doctors are lobbied. In some cases, maybe to one direction and the other. But we think that there's always going to be the psychological mechanisms of biases, which is why they should matter more, even if external biases matter to some extent. Let's talk about psychological biases. HUJI say there's fear in a sense, there's fear for myself from death. OO say, I care about my family to some extent and I have an obligation towards them. At the end of top half, we're left at a deadlock. Who makes more irrational decisions? Which incentives are the ones that taint it the most? I think that by providing independent analysis and by weighing it, Ayala is able to tip this clash. Why does he tell you that I care about myself more than my obligation to my family, as OO say? First, because of the explanation of finality that he provides. I feel that this is the end for me, that eternal decisions are now made on my behalf, that delaying death is my only chance to escape that finality. I know this finality doesn't exist for my family. I know they're not facing the same sense of doom, which is why I care about it less in the moment. Secondly, he says that the pain is so extreme that, notice, it's not that you prioritize the pain. It is literally the mental capacity to take into account other emotional considerations when you're so hell-bent and spent on feeling the pains that you feel in your terminal illnesses that you simply cannot think of something else. This is why even when people aren't dementic but still suffer from tumors that are so extreme, they don't even recognize their own family members because every second of their attention is spent on their self and their pain. Thirdly, he also explains in the second case that there's very little pushback from the family because the family feels that it's a final decision you have made. They feel that it's disrespectful to try and challenge your decision, that it's shameful in front of the doctors after you have made that decision and you're the weak one in this situation to challenge you and to probe you, which is why you don't feel your family's incentives as urgently as you feel your own, which is why in more cases than not, you make an irrational decision on yourself to yes, accept this. Let's now talk about the impacts that flow from this. I think that what happens here is that, once again, as I framed at the top, HUJI have a problem of even if they prove irrationality, we're not clear on what the major impacts of this rationality is beyond the individual themselves, which means they're unable to weigh their impact against OO that has a better impact on the individual in terms of the financial responses on them. The simple reason for this is because I think that if to directly weigh against HUJI, our addition on the mental harms that affect children probably matters more than the economic pressures that OO and HUJI identified. Why is this true? First, it affects more people, being the family. Notice, it is your spouse that you didn't listen to. It's your many kids, top half. Okay, secondly, also just remember that this is more long-term. Many of the patients we're talking about, especially the ones that would accept these things, are the ones who are terminally ill and care about it sufficiently. This means that even if we impose some economic liabilities on them, they might be for a few months. The mental effects of feeling betrayed by my parent, of challenging and questioning whether they wanted to advise with me and trusted me, and saying and thinking that they prioritized themselves, are things that will carry on through life. The person that was supposed to teach me love, the person who I confided in most, the person who I showed my truest colors to, chose at the end to not care more about me. And we think that at this point, it affects people to a far longer extent. Lastly, it is also logically precedent to OO's impact of economic conditions. Because notice, everything they say about taking out a loan or not paying medicine assumes that your family doesn't do it for you. The problem with this is that families are capable to pool resources. They're capable to replace hospice centers in many cases if they care enough. But if they resent you silently, they will give you less money that requires you this loan. They will maybe cut ties with you for a few weeks, which means that that's when you need to take the loan. We lose out on family support and we don't know why the loan matters more. For all those reasons, closing government.
Thank you, GovWeb. To close the debate, I call upon UpWeb.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Cool. This. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, I agree. We did not prove that on the counterfactual you are more rational because we don't give a fuck about the clash of rationality. The fact that top have spent time on this does not mean that this is our bottom line. So this is not a response from Amitai. Our case is very simple. People today don't access their basic insurance rights, either because they don't get an insurance from the get-go, or because after they get it, they don't have the legal capacity to actually execute their rights and get the money from the company. This is why the first and most important clash in this debate will be where do people have more access to their insurance rights. The second clash will be on rationality. I will weigh the first and I will show why we win the first. Before that, few points of extraneous rebuttal that will not get into these clashes. Mainly to the point we just heard about families. I want to make 3 quick responses about families and why they are less important in this debate. 1, and I cannot stress this enough, it is not their money. I don't care how much CG is going to prove there are more of them and they are going to live longer because this is irrelevant to who has the right to the money. According to CG's logic, we shouldn't even give it to the families. We should take this money and donate it to Against Malaria Foundation. According to CG's logic, you should ban people from writing a will and just always divide the money equally between the children because they should not have a right to give the money for something else. Of course, this is not how it operates. If it's their money, I don't care if the family suffers more. They don't have a right to this money. If the person prioritizes it for themselves, it's their fucking right. Secondly, the family also need the money in the short run. Based on OG that agrees with us that you have significant medical expenses today, presumably, if you don't have the ability to access the money now, you need to get into debt, which your family will need to continue paying with interest later after your life. So we really think that they are also probably interested in this. Lastly, I don't think they have a big delta on how it impacts family relations. Why? Because there are 2 options. Either your family isn't a dickhead, and if they are not dickheads, they will not make you feel like you should suffer with dilemmas about what happens monetarily after you die, because they'll be empathetic to the situation where you're currently dying. Whereas if they are dickheads, they don't need this motion to be dickheads. They have plenty of other opportunities to get into these financial fights. Fight over the will and who you should donate the money to and how much. Fight over should you pay for life insurance from the get-go. So I really don't know their fucking delta. Awesome. I don't care about families. Let's get to the main clashes. Why is it more important that people access their insurance rights from the get-go than the question of do they opt into this rationally? Several reasons. 1, just basic logical priority. If you can't access your insurance, you can't access any of the benefits on either OG or OO, regardless of whether or not you're rational. 2, because absent the access to this, the comparative is 0 money. At the best case of government, if you are fully irrational and agree to a very bad deal, you will lose a lot of the money. You will get 100,000 instead of 1 million. You'll get 10%. It's better than 0. Thirdly, because we think that it impacts not just money, but actually your life. Because as OG concedes and Ishai analyzes, life insurance, when you get it, also encourages you and helps you to live longer because their incentive is for you to die later to pay you less. And more people getting life insurance helps people live longer, which is more important than just money. Lastly, rationality is a means to an end to maximize one's benefit. And I want to be very clear on something. Gov, at best, proves imperfect choice on our side because of irrationality. The counterfactual is zero choice because they ban it completely. It's not like they suddenly make these people rational to be able to make this decision. They just take away the decision even for those that it is good for them. So seeing as neither side gets perfect choice, the question should not be rationality. The question should be where do you actually get better outcomes, which is why getting this from the get-go is much more important. What are the responses we get to this? One, we can regulate. This was so underanalyzed, not because they need to show why they can regulate. I agree they can regulate. How will regulation fix any of the things that HUJI analyzed? They didn't even give us an example of what the regulation would be to do this. Secondly, not mutually exclusive. I'm happy to have both regulation and the additional mechanisms from the free market to self-regulate and help you access your rights. Second response they give us, the hospital is public and will advise you. How can a hospital advise you on insurance? Doctors know health. They don't know finance. They are legally not allowed to give you insurance advice in most countries because they are not licensed for this. We have no idea how it answers anything we said. What do we get from OG on this clash? OG says these will be predatory conditions, and this is why you will not access your rights. Several responses to this. One, as I said, comparatively, it is less predatory than only having insurance, which is predatory for the symmetrical reasons to OG, but without this fixing mechanism. Secondly, competition solves for it. There's a lot of money going into the insurance and life insurance market. It's worth a lot of money, which means that there are many different legal companies with an incentive to compete for you and offer you better and more competitive deals. Thirdly, even if this field is going to be monopolized and not competitive, per HUJI's analysis, they will compete with the insurance companies themselves because they have conflicting interests, because the company that buys your rights wants you to be able to access your insurance, and they will inform you about all of your rights from your insurance, whereas the insurance wants you to not sell your rights to a company which is much better equipped to take the money away from them, so they will inform you about everything that's bad with the company that is trying to sell to buy your rights from you because they want you to keep it for yourself. So we really think there are plenty of different bodies that are here to help. Lastly, we think that the asymmetry of information in this case is in your favor. You know much more than the company that buys from you about your own health and how long you're going to live. So we think that you have enough fixing mechanisms. Opening.
If your insurance plan is bad, the V company can convince you to get a much lower payout, which gets worse over time because you never expect that to work. But on our side, lawyers come after death and approach the family for a cut of the payout. HUJI strawman this.
Okay, no, because one, your insurance policy from the get-go is something that you sign before death. Two, because even after death, a lot of the analysis that HUJI gives is also completely symmetric for the family. Sure, they are not dying, but they still don't have the legal expertise. They still don't have the available resources. They are overly occupied right now with the mental burden of having lost a family member and the financial burden of having to take care of burial and of feeding the family with one less provider and so on. So we think all of the analysis still stands. Cool. Lastly, quickly on rationality. Very quickly on the idea of medicine will cost more. Yeah, but their logic is don't let people spend on medicine that they need because that will make medicine cheaper. I don't think that's a good solution. Cool. Why do we not care about rationality other than the weighings? Few reasons. One, if people truly reach the point of being irrational because they're so medicated, they get a legal guardian to fix this. This is why we already let them consent for so many other things like their medical treatment or their insurance policies. Secondly, we think that all of the reasons that government gives are perfectly rational. If you're suffering from pain, it is rational to prioritize it. Oppose.
All right, thank you, Upweb. And that's the end of the debate. I believe this is a close round, so virtually across floor. And good luck for the breaks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks around, everyone.
Thanks.